Do not waste my time. Either fix it or get out of the way. The words echoed across the production floor so sharply that every conversation came to an abrupt stop. More than 50 engineers, consultants, and technical specialists turned toward the woman who had spoken. Olivia Brooks, the chief executive officer of Brooks Dynamics, stood beside the silent assembly line with her arms crossed, her patience exhausted after 6 straight hours of failure. Every minute the factory remained frozen meant another expensive contract slipping closer to disaster. Machines worth millions of dollars stood motionless beneath bright industrial lights. Computer screens flashed warning messages no one seemed able to explain. Some experts blamed the software. Others insisted the electrical system had failed. A few argued that replacing the entire control network was the only solution. The room was full of confident voices, but not a single answer. Standing quietly near the back of the crowd was Nathan Carter. His faded maintenance jacket carried small traces of machine oil from the morning inspections. A worn toolbox rested beside his boots. No expensive watch. No executive badge. No impressive title hanging from a polished suit. Just another maintenance technician most people barely noticed. Olivia glanced toward him with visible frustration. "You," she said without even asking his name. "If you are not helping, then stop standing there." A few people laughed softly. One consultant leaned toward another and whispered, "Maybe he brought a wrench to solve what 50 engineers cannot." More quiet laughter followed. Nathan did not respond. He simply looked at the silent conveyor system, listening instead of speaking. There was something unusual about the rhythm of the factory. It was not the sound that caught his attention. It was the absence of one. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the ceiling where a network of automated carriers normally moved without interruption. Nothing. Absolute silence. Sometimes silence revealed more than noise ever could. Olivia turned back toward the engineering team. "We have clients waiting across the country. We have deliveries that cannot leave this building. We are losing money every minute. I hired experts, not spectators." One senior engineer cleared his throat before pointing towards several digital diagrams. "We are narrowing the possibilities." Olivia shook her head. "You have been narrowing possibilities since sunrise." Nathan quietly knelt beside one section of the conveyor line. He did not touch anything. He simply watched. One rotating sensor blinked at a slightly different interval from every identical sensor beside it. Barely noticeable, easy to ignore. His expression never changed. A young technician noticed him staring and asked politely, "Do you see something?" Nathan answered in the calmest voice imaginable, "I see something that does not belong." The young technician looked closer but found nothing unusual. Before he could ask another question, Olivia walked toward Nathan with growing impatience. "I asked for solutions," she said, "not guessing games." Nathan slowly stood and met her eyes without the slightest hint of anger. "I am not guessing." Olivia folded her arms. "Then tell everyone what 50 specialists somehow missed." Every pair of eyes settled on the quiet single father in the worn maintenance jacket. Nobody expected the next few minutes to change everything. They only expected another ordinary worker to fail where every celebrated expert already had. Nathan gently picked up his toolbox, took one slow step toward the silent production line, and said, "Before anyone replaces this system, would you allow me exactly 5 minutes to listen to what the machines have been trying to say all morning?" The laughter disappeared. For the first time that day, the enormous factory became completely silent. Nathan Carter did not answer immediately. He rested one hand on the handle of his weathered toolbox while the silence inside the factory grew heavier with every passing second. Olivia Brooks looked at him as though she had already decided what the outcome would be. Around her, the consultants exchanged amused smiles, convinced that another maintenance worker was about to embarrass himself in front of everyone. One senior engineer folded his arms and quietly muttered that this was becoming a waste of valuable time. Nathan heard every word, yet his expression remained calm. Years earlier, comments like those might have tempted him to defend himself. Life had taught him something far more valuable. Dignity did not become stronger by arguing. It became stronger by remaining steady when everyone else lost control. He slowly crouched beside the motionless conveyor and placed 2 fingers against a steel support beam. He closed his eyes for only a moment. The vibration was almost impossible to detect, but it was there. Very faint, very irregular. Most people in the room were watching computer screens. Nathan was listening to the machine itself. The young technician who had spoken to him earlier leaned closer with genuine curiosity. "What are you looking for?" he asked quietly. Nathan smiled politely. "Not what? Who?" The young man looked confused. Nathan continued in the same calm voice. "Every machine tells the truth. People only hear it after they stop talking." The words sounded almost too simple to belong inside a factory filled with advanced technology, yet they lingered in the air. Olivia checked her watch and exhaled impatiently. "You have 4 minutes left," she said firmly. Nathan nodded without taking offense. He walked slowly along the production line, stopping every few feet to observe small details everyone else had ignored. One warning light blinked exactly every 3 seconds. Another blinked every 4. A cooling fan started and stopped without any visible command. One cable tray carried almost no heat, while the neighboring tray was noticeably warm. None of those details looked important by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Nathan followed that pattern with quiet confidence. The consultants continued debating software updates and replacement costs behind him, their voices growing louder as frustration replaced certainty. Nathan never joined the discussion. Instead, he climbed a short maintenance platform and looked toward the overhead transport system. His eyes settled on a compact sensor mounted above the line. Dust had gathered around its housing, but one small indicator light flashed with unusual hesitation. He watched it for several seconds before climbing back down. The senior engineer noticed where Nathan had been looking and shook his head. "We replaced that sensor this morning," he said confidently. "It has already been tested." Nathan looked at him with respect rather than disagreement. "I believe you did. Then why are you staring at it?" the engineer asked. Nathan answered softly. "Because it is behaving exactly like a brand new sensor connected to the wrong conversation." The engineer frowned. He had never heard anyone describe industrial equipment that way. Olivia crossed the distance between them, now more curious than irritated despite herself. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Nathan looked once more across the silent factory floor where hundreds of employees stood waiting, then toward the photographs taped inside his worn toolbox lid. They showed a smiling little girl holding a homemade science fair ribbon. For just a heartbeat, the hard lines in his face softened. Every morning before school, she reminded him of the same promise. Stay kind. Stay patient. Let your work speak before your words. Nathan closed the toolbox gently and looked back at the silent machinery. "I think the system has been blamed for a mistake it never made," he said. "If I am right, we do not need 50 more experts. We only need one person willing to admit that everyone has been searching in the wrong place." Olivia Brooks studied Nathan Carter for several long seconds before giving a short nod. 5 minutes, she said. Not 1 second more. Her voice still carried authority, but the sharp edge of dismissal had softened into cautious curiosity. The room remained unconvinced. Several consultants stepped aside with folded arms, expecting another failed attempt to become one more example of why experience should never be replaced by instinct. Nathan simply thanked her and walked toward the electrical control cabinet beneath the overhead transport rail. He did not rush. He did not try to impress anyone. Every movement reflected years of quiet discipline rather than performance. He opened the access panel and listened before touching a single component. The cooling fans hummed with perfect consistency. The power indicators glowed exactly as they should. Nothing appeared broken. That was precisely why everyone had been searching in the wrong direction. Most people looked for damaged equipment. Nathan looked for honest equipment receiving dishonest information. He followed one bundle of communication cables with his eyes until it disappeared into the ceiling above the conveyor network. Then he noticed something almost invisible. A recently installed identification tag had been placed upside down. It seemed too small to matter, yet Nathan gently smiled as though he had finally met the person responsible for the silence surrounding the factory. The young technician approached again. "Is that important?" he whispered. Nathan answered without looking away. Mistakes rarely arrive alone. They usually leave small footprints behind. The technician examined the label, but still saw nothing unusual. Nathan asked him a simple question. "Who replaced the overhead sensor this morning?" The young man hesitated before pointing toward one of the senior engineering contractors. The contractor immediately stepped forward. "My team handled that replacement," he said confidently. "Everything was installed according to the manufacturer's procedure." Nathan nodded respectfully. I believe you followed every instruction. The contractor lifted his chin. Then what are you suggesting? Nathan looked up toward the sensor once more. I think the instructions assumed something that is no longer true. Several engineers exchanged puzzled looks. Nathan requested a portable service lift. Someone reluctantly rolled it into position. As he slowly rose toward the overhead system, every conversation inside the enormous factory faded into silence. Even Olivia found herself watching more closely than before. Nathan reached the sensor housing and examined the connector without removing it. A tiny colored alignment mark caught his attention. He smiled again, this time with quiet certainty. There you are, he whispered almost to himself. He climbed back down carrying nothing except confidence. The contractor crossed his arms. If you found the problem, explain it. Nathan calmly replied. The sensor is working perfectly. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. One consultant laughed. Then why is the factory still shut down? Nathan looked around at the gathering crowd before answering. Because everyone trusted the newest part instead of questioning the newest assumption. Olivia stepped closer. Speak plainly. Nathan pointed toward the overhead rail. That sensor belongs to an upgraded communication network. This production line is still operating with the previous generation control architecture. Someone installed the correct replacement part for the wrong generation of equipment. The sensor has been sending information in a language the control system cannot understand. Silence followed. Several engineers immediately opened technical manuals on their tablets. Within moments, their expressions changed. One after another, they stopped speaking altogether. The serial numbers on the replacement component did not match the original production specification. The part itself was flawless. It had simply never belonged there. Olivia slowly turned toward the contractor. Did anyone verify the model number before installation? No one answered. Nathan quietly reached into his toolbox and removed a carefully wrapped backup sensor that had been sitting there since his morning inspection. I kept this because something about today's replacement order did not feel right, he said gently. Sometimes experience begins long before the emergency does. Nathan held the replacement sensor in his hands with the same care another person might use to protect a family photograph. There was no excitement in his face and no desire to prove anyone wrong. He simply wanted the factory to breathe again. Olivia Brooks looked from the backup sensor to the incorrect component still mounted above the production line. For the first time since the crisis had begun, she realized the quiet maintenance technician had arrived prepared long before anyone else understood there was a real problem. The senior contractor cleared his throat. Even if that part was installed by mistake, replacing it is not enough. The control system has already recorded multiple communication failures. The software may still refuse to restart. Nathan nodded. You are correct. The contractor seemed relieved to hear agreement. Nathan continued calmly. That is why replacing the sensor is only the first step. Several engineers immediately looked back toward their computer terminals. Nathan walked to the service lift once again and carefully exchanged the incorrect sensor for the original unit from his toolbox. Every motion was slow, deliberate, and confident. There were no unnecessary gestures because experience had taught him that careful work never needed dramatic movements. Once the replacement was complete, he climbed back down and brushed the dust from his hands. The overhead indicator changed from a flashing amber light to a steady green signal. A few people smiled too early, expecting the entire factory to come back to life. Nothing happened. The conveyor belts remained perfectly still. One consultant quietly whispered, I knew it could not be that simple. Nathan looked toward the main control room. Now we tell the system the truth. He walked to the primary operator console and asked permission before touching the keyboard. Olivia stepped aside without hesitation. The confidence in her posture had changed into attentive respect. Nathan opened the maintenance diagnostics menu that few people outside the original installation team even knew existed. One young engineer watched the screen with growing surprise. I have never seen that menu before, he admitted. Nathan smiled politely. Most people never need to. He selected a hidden verification sequence that compared every installed component with the factory's original hardware registry. Within seconds, a single warning appeared on the display. Component identity conflict resolved. Pending communication cache requires reset. Nathan quietly pointed at the message. The system is still waiting for someone to admit the mistake. Olivia looked at the screen. Can you clear it? Nathan nodded. The computer only remembers what people teach it to remember. He pressed one confirmation button. The room became perfectly still. Every employee fixed their eyes on the motionless production line stretching across the massive building. A deep mechanical click echoed through the steel framework. One cooling fan accelerated. Another answered from the opposite end of the factory. Conveyor motors awakened one section at a time. Overhead transport carriers began moving smoothly along their rails. Digital displays that had shown bright red warning messages only moments earlier shifted to steady green status indicators. One by one, every machine returned to life as though the factory itself had taken its first full breath after holding it all morning. Nobody spoke. The silence that followed was completely different from the silence before. Earlier it had been filled with frustration and doubt. Now it was filled with disbelief. 50 specialists stood frozen, while the maintenance technician they had barely noticed calmly closed the diagnostics window and stepped away from the console. Olivia slowly looked around the room at the faces of engineers, consultants, supervisors, and operators who had witnessed the impossible become ordinary. Then she turned back toward Nathan. "Who taught you to understand this system better than everyone here?" she asked quietly. Nathan glanced toward the moving conveyor belts with quiet satisfaction before answering in the same humble voice that had never once become louder than the machines. Sometimes the person who built the foundation no longer sits in the corner office. Sometimes he simply wears a maintenance jacket and comes to work before sunrise because his daughter still believes that honest work is something to be proud of. Nobody moved for several seconds after Nathan finished speaking. The machines continued running with smooth precision, filling the factory with the steady rhythm everyone had feared they might never hear again. Employees who had spent the morning exchanging worried glances now stood quietly watching the production line move as if nothing had ever happened. Olivia Brooks lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking back at Nathan. The confidence she had carried all morning had not disappeared. It had simply been replaced by humility. "You built this system?" she asked softly. Nathan shook his head with a gentle smile. "Not by myself. Hundreds of people helped. I was only fortunate enough to be part of the original engineering team." The senior contractor stared at him in disbelief. "If that is true, why are you working maintenance?" Nathan closed his toolbox before answering. "Because life sometimes asks different questions than a career does." No one interrupted him. 8 years ago, my wife passed away unexpectedly. My daughter needed someone at home more than this company needed another engineer. A leadership position came with long flights, endless meetings, and weekends away. My little girl only had one father. The decision was easy. His words were simple, yet they settled over the room with more weight than any technical explanation had carried all day. Several employees quietly looked down, thinking about their own families. Olivia noticed the photographs still attached inside Nathan's toolbox. One picture showed a smiling young girl proudly holding a science project. Another showed the two of them eating pancakes in a small kitchen. The edges of the photographs had become worn from years of being opened every morning. Nathan gently closed the lid before anyone could stare too long. "She reminds me why I come to work," he said. "Every repair I make helps another family receive their paycheck on time." The production supervisor suddenly hurried across the floor holding a tablet. His face showed relief mixed with amazement. "The distribution center just confirmed that every delayed shipment is back on schedule," he announced. "None of our customers canceled their orders." Quiet smiles spread throughout the factory. Operators returned to their stations with renewed energy. The tension that had gripped the building since sunrise slowly dissolved into grateful conversation. Olivia watched her employees more carefully than she had in months. She realized that while everyone had been focused on protecting the company's reputation, Nathan had been focused on protecting the people who depended on it. That difference changed everything. She extended her hand toward him. "Nathan, I owe you an apology." He accepted the handshake politely, but did not linger on the moment. "Everyone makes quick judgments sometimes," he replied. "The important part is what we choose after we recognize them." The contractor who had defended the incorrect installation stepped forward looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I should have listened instead of assuming I knew more," he admitted. Nathan offered him a warm smile. "Experience is not about never making mistakes. It is about being willing to learn from the next one." Those words seemed to ease the tension more than any criticism ever could. Just then the large digital production board updated across the factory wall. Daily output estimates climbed rapidly back toward normal levels. Employees quietly applauded, not because they had been told to, but because they understood they had witnessed something much larger than a successful repair. They had watched humility outperform pride. As the applause slowly faded, Olivia noticed an old employee identification badge hanging from a faded key ring attached to Nathan's toolbox. The photograph was younger, but unmistakably the same man. The title printed beneath his name caused her heart to skip for a moment. It read, Principal Systems Architect, Brooks Dynamics. She looked up at Nathan in complete disbelief, realizing she had spent the entire morning ordering around the very man whose ideas had helped build the company she now led. Olivia Brooks held the old identification badge in her hand far longer than anyone expected. The noise of the factory gradually returned as employees resumed their work, yet inside the executive section of the production floor, an unusual silence remained. She carefully compared the younger face on the badge with the man standing in front of her wearing a faded maintenance jacket. The names matched perfectly, so did the employee number engraved beneath it. She looked toward the engineering director, whose expression had turned almost pale. "Is this authentic?" she asked quietly. Before anyone else could answer, the director slowly nodded. "I have seen that badge before," he admitted. Nathan Carter was one of the lead architects who helped design the original automation platform more than a decade ago. Several consultants exchanged embarrassed glances. One of them quietly closed the expensive presentation he had spent hours defending. Another lowered his tablet without saying a word. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had vanished, replaced by thoughtful silence. Olivia returned the badge with both hands instead of casually passing it back. It was a small gesture, but everyone noticed the difference. "Why did nobody tell me you were still here?" she asked. Nathan slipped the badge into his toolbox with a gentle smile. "Because I never asked anyone to." She frowned slightly. "Your personnel file lists you as a maintenance technician." Nathan nodded. "That is my job. It does not mention your engineering background. I requested that it not become part of my daily work." Olivia looked genuinely confused. Most people spend their entire careers trying to be recognized. Nathan glanced across the production floor where operators smiled with relief as products once again moved steadily along the conveyors. "Recognition feeds the ego," he replied calmly. "Responsibility feeds a family." Those words settled deeply into the room. Nobody reached for an argument because there was nothing left to argue against. The engineering director quietly admitted that Nathan had declined multiple executive promotions over the years. Each offer had come with larger salaries, bigger offices, and greater authority. Nathan had politely refused every one of them. He always gave the same reason, the director explained. He wanted to be home every afternoon when his daughter came back from school. Olivia folded her arms, not in frustration this time, but in reflection. She had spent years believing success required constant sacrifice. Standing before her was a man who had sacrificed prestige instead, choosing something he considered even more valuable. One operator approached Nathan, carrying a cup of fresh coffee. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "My wife called a few minutes ago. If production had stayed down much longer, overtime would have been canceled this week. We really needed those hours." Nathan accepted the coffee with quiet gratitude. "I am glad everything worked out." The operator smiled. "You did more than fix a machine today." As he walked away, Olivia noticed how naturally people spoke to Nathan. They trusted him not because of a title, but because of years of steady character. That kind of respect could not be printed on a business card. It had to be earned one ordinary day at a time. She looked across the factory and suddenly saw things she had overlooked before. Employees greeted Nathan with warm smiles. Supervisors nodded with genuine appreciation. Young technicians watched him with admiration instead of fear. The culture she had been trying to build through policies and meetings had quietly existed all along in the example of one humble father. Olivia finally took a slow breath and said, "Nathan, I think I have spent years measuring the wrong things." Nathan looked at her kindly before answering. "Machines respond to the signals they receive. People are not much different. When we only reward titles, we stop noticing character. When we notice character, excellence usually follows on its own." His words lingered in the air long after he picked up his toolbox and calmly returned to the maintenance schedule he had planned before the crisis had ever begun. Nathan returned to his maintenance route as though the morning had been completely ordinary. He stopped beside a packaging station, tightened a loose guide rail, answered a young technician's question about routine lubrication, and made a small note on his inspection clipboard before continuing down the production floor. Watching him from a distance, Olivia Brooks found it difficult to understand how someone capable of solving a crisis that had defeated 50 experts could immediately return to replacing worn rollers and checking air pressure gauges without expecting applause. It was as though recognition had never been his destination. She quietly asked the engineering director to bring her every archived record connected to the original construction of the factory. Within half an hour, several thick binders and digital files covered the conference table overlooking the production floor. As Olivia carefully turned the pages, a very different story began to emerge. Nathan's name appeared repeatedly beside the most critical design decisions that had allowed Brooks Dynamics to expand across the country. He had patented efficiency improvements, developed diagnostic systems that were still being used every day, and written maintenance principles that remained part of employee training manuals. Yet after the year his wife passed away, his name almost disappeared from executive reports. Promotion offers were documented. Everyone had been respectfully declined. Instead, there were requests for flexible hours, fewer business trips, and permission to remain close to home. None of those requests mentioned sacrifice. They simply explained that his daughter needed stability more than he needed another title. Olivia slowly closed the final binder and looked through the glass wall toward the production floor below. Nathan was kneeling beside a conveyor, patiently teaching a new employee how to identify early signs of bearing wear by listening instead of guessing. He never mentioned his past accomplishments. He never corrected anyone who called him simply the maintenance man. The young employee smiled after finally hearing the faint difference Nathan had described. Nathan smiled back with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed knowledge became valuable only after it was shared. Olivia suddenly realized that leadership did not always stand behind polished conference tables. Sometimes it wore work boots and carried a scratched metal toolbox. She walked downstairs alone and stopped beside the maintenance station where Nathan was organizing replacement parts. "May I ask you something?" she said. Nathan looked up with the same calm expression he had worn all day. "Of course." Olivia hesitated before speaking. "Do you ever regret leaving the executive path?" Nathan thought for a moment before gently shaking his head. "I missed opportunities," he admitted. "But I never missed my daughter's school concerts, her science fairs, her birthdays, or the evenings when she needed someone to help with homework. I can always earn another promotion. I could never earn those moments back." Olivia lowered her eyes as his words settled into her heart. She remembered the countless family events she had canceled because another meeting seemed more important at the time. Nathan noticed the silence, but never pressed her for an answer. Instead, he returned a small wrench to its proper place inside the toolbox, every tool arranged with remarkable care. "People think success is measured by what hangs on the office wall," he said quietly. "I think it is measured by who still smiles when you walk through your front door." Before Olivia could respond, several employees approached Nathan carrying handwritten thank you notes collected during the afternoon. One after another, they thanked him not only for saving the production schedule, but for years of patient guidance that had quietly shaped their own careers. Nathan accepted every note with genuine humility, reading each one as though it were more valuable than any corporate award. Standing a few feet away, Olivia understood that respect had never been something Nathan demanded. It had been something he earned every ordinary day, long before anyone finally stopped to notice. The following Monday morning, every employee at Brooks Dynamics received an invitation to a company-wide gathering inside the main production hall. Rumors spread quickly across every department. Some believed new policies would be announced after the factory shut down. Others expected disciplinary action against the contractors responsible for the costly mistake. Nathan Carter arrived exactly as he did every other morning. He parked his old pickup truck in the same employee lot, greeted the security guard by name, and carried his familiar toolbox through the side entrance. Nothing about his routine suggested he expected to be the center of attention. He even paused to help a new employee locate the correct maintenance storage room before making his way toward the assembly area. Hundreds of workers filled the production floor as Olivia Brooks stepped onto a small platform overlooking the factory. There were no dramatic lights, no promotional banners, and no celebration music. The atmosphere felt sincere. Olivia looked across the crowd before speaking. Last week, I made a mistake that every leader should remember. The room became completely quiet. I judged a person's value by a job title instead of by character. I assumed confidence belonged to the loudest voices in the room. I believed expertise always arrived wearing an executive badge. She paused before continuing. I was wrong. Many employees instinctively turned toward Nathan, who remained near the back of the crowd with his toolbox resting beside his boots. He looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention and quietly hoped the meeting would not last very long. Olivia continued. The person who saved this company was someone many of us walked past every single day without truly seeing. She invited Nathan to join her at the front. He hesitated for a moment before slowly walking through the crowd. Employees stepped aside with quiet respect rather than applause. The silence itself carried more meaning than cheering ever could. Olivia extended her hand once again, but this time it was not simply a personal apology. It was a public acknowledgement. Nathan Carter, on behalf of Brooks Dynamics, I owe you gratitude and an apology. More importantly, every employee deserves a workplace where wisdom is respected no matter where it comes from. Nathan accepted the handshake with the same calm humility that had guided him through every difficult moment of the previous week. Thank you, he said softly. But if we truly learn something, then let us make sure this is never about one person. Olivia nodded for him to continue. Nathan looked across the faces of mechanics, operators, engineers, custodians, supervisors, and executives standing together under the same roof. Every person in this building notices something others do not. The newest employee may see tomorrow's best idea. The quietest technician may prevent tomorrow's biggest problem. Respect should never depend on a title. It should depend on how we treat each other every day. No one interrupted him. His words did not sound like a speech. They sounded like truth. Olivia turned toward the leadership team, standing nearby. Effective immediately, every improvement meeting will include representatives from every level of this company. No voice will be dismissed because of a position or uniform. The announcement was met not with loud celebration, but with thoughtful smiles throughout the factory. The senior contractor who had argued with Nathan stepped forward carrying a framed certificate recognizing technical excellence. Nathan politely looked at it before smiling. I appreciate the kindness, he said. But if you truly want to honor me, create more opportunities for young technicians to learn. That will last much longer than anything hanging on my wall. Olivia looked at him with genuine admiration. She had expected him to ask for a promotion, a larger office, or a prestigious engineering position. Instead, he asked for second chances and better futures for people who had not yet discovered their own potential. In that quiet moment, everyone inside the factory understood the difference between achieving success and deserving respect, and they realized that the strongest leaders were often the ones who never asked to be noticed at all. Nearly 6 months passed, and Brooks Dynamics became known for something far more valuable than record production numbers. Visitors who toured the factory often noticed an unusual culture that could not be measured on financial reports. Engineers regularly gathered beside maintenance technicians to exchange ideas. Executives stopped to ask machine operators what they had observed during their shifts. New employees quickly discovered that every opinion was welcomed if it was offered with honesty and respect. The company had become stronger not because its technology had changed, but because its people had learned to see one another differently. Olivia Brooks kept one reminder in her office that visitors often found surprising. It was not an award or a framed newspaper article. It was the incorrect sensor that had nearly shut down the entire factory. Beneath it rested a small engraved plaque that read, "Never confuse appearance with ability." Every leadership meeting began with that simple reminder. Whenever difficult decisions arose, Olivia asked one question before reaching a conclusion. Have we listened to the quietest voice in the room? More often than anyone expected, that question uncovered solutions that had almost been overlooked. Nathan Carter never accepted the executive office Olivia continued to offer him. He remained exactly where he wanted to be. Every morning before sunrise, he unlocked the maintenance workshop, poured himself a cup of coffee, reviewed inspection reports, and walked the factory floor with the same steady pace that had always defined him. Young technicians sought him out not because he carried authority, but because he shared knowledge with patience instead of pride. He taught them to trust their eyes, their ears, and their character before trusting assumptions. He often reminded them that machines could always be repaired, but broken respect was much harder to restore. At home, life remained beautifully ordinary. His daughter, Emma Carter, greeted him every afternoon with stories about school, science projects, and dreams for the future. One evening, she proudly placed a report card on the kitchen table filled with excellent grades. Nathan smiled with quiet pride, then helped her prepare dinner while listening to every detail of her day. As they washed the dishes together, Emma looked up at her father and asked, "Did anything interesting happen at work today?" Nathan laughed softly before answering. "A lot of people learned something important." She tilted her head. "About machines?" He gently shook his head. "About people." She smiled, satisfied with the answer, even though she did not yet understand the full meaning behind it. Years later, she would. On the anniversary of the factory incident, Brooks Dynamics introduced a mentorship program named the Quiet Excellence Initiative. Every new employee, regardless of position, was paired with experienced workers from different departments to encourage mutual respect and shared learning. Olivia insisted that the first mentor listed in the program would always be Nathan Carter. When he learned about the honor, he quietly thanked her but asked that every mentor's name appear in the same size lettering. "Nobody builds anything worthwhile alone," he explained. Olivia agreed without hesitation. Sometimes the greatest victories never appeared in headlines. They lived inside ordinary mornings, honest work, humble choices, and promises kept to the people waiting at home. The day Nathan silently repaired a factory, he also repaired something far more important. He reminded an entire company that dignity does not wear a title, wisdom does not demand attention, and true greatness rarely announces its arrival. It simply goes to work, keeps its word, lifts others without asking for credit, and leaves the world better than it found it. Long after the laughter had faded and the crisis had become a memory, one truth continued to echo through the halls of Brooks Dynamics. Never underestimate the quiet person who chooses character over recognition, because the strongest foundation is almost always the one nobody notices until everything else begins to shake.